Amendment, Mr. President, is related to Section 121(1), which also speaks about how the order will be implemented. It specifically talks about negative resolution. Ordinarily, I think in parliamentary parlance, you have positive resolution and you have negative resolution. The option that has been taken here by the Chief Parliamentary Counsel is for negative resolution. And Section 122 was then amended to make special regulations subject to that negative resolution rather than positive or affirmative resolution. The bill is before the chamber. We've had an opportunity to review it, and I want, for the benefit of the chamber and all of those listening, to get into the why of the amendments. Now, let me start first by saying, Mr. President, that these are not amendments that change fundamentally the existing scope of the bill. They allow us to implement the already existing provisions in the bill, and they clarify how they're meant to be implemented. There are two things, Mr. President, at play here. And if you listened to the Honorable Attorney General in the other place, you would have heard the context for these changes. And why, Mr. President? I, a law-abiding citizen that I am, have gotten one ticket in my life. And I was, I think, an 18-year-old at the time. I was home on vacation. So all these times I have been a good road user. I can see some senators looking at me side-eye. But I got one ticket as a young 18-year-old at home for the holidays from university overseas, and I did not stop at a stop sign. It was right in the back there, actually, in town where Going Places used to be back in the day, and I came to the end, and I came to a rolling stop. I didn't actually stop. You know when you're young, you're feeling yourself, and you're behind the wheel, you're behind the wheel of a car, you've got your parents' car, and you're moving. And so I got to the stop. There was nothing coming. It was a one-way street, and there was traffic that could only come from one direction, and there was nothing ahead of me. And so I came to a rolling stop. Police siren. Man stops me. Pull over, and he tells me, because he was looking at me and seeing the youth in my face, right? So he's got this little way here now. And so he says, "Can you see that sign back there?" "Which sign, sir?" "There." He says, "It's a red sign right there on the post. Can you read it?" And he said, "Do you know what it says?" He said, "S-T-O-P. Do you know what that means? Stop." So he stopped me. And this time now I have fear and trembling because I drive in my mother's car. And I don't want to have to go home and tell my mother that I got a ticket for her car at 18 years old because she can be vexed. So I honestly don't even know. I talked to the man, talked to the police officer. I was very polite. I was young enough, and my mother always taught me to be respectful to my elders. And so I gave him all the information he wanted. I engaged with him. I accepted the correction as was necessary at the time. I was not wrong and strong. I was not powerful, foolish, and I went on about my business. I don't know what happened thereafter. I can't tell you if I ever actually got a ticket. I can't tell you what happened in the mail, if something ever came to me in the mail. I don't know. But in contrast, Mr. President, fast forward several years later, I was driving in the passenger seat this time of a friend's car in South Africa. And we were driving on a highway, and he was speeding for sure. And police stepped out on the side of the highway with a traffic gun and pulled him right over. Extraordinarily polite, extremely professional. And he said to him, "Do you know why I pulled you over? You were speeding." And he talked him through, he showed him what the radar message registered his speeds at, and he issued him with a ticket. My friend at the time was able to decide on the basis of that ticket that he got whether he was going to pay the ticket immediately online, which he could have done, or if he was going to contest what the police officer's radar clocked him as traveling at, and say that what the radar clocked you as traveling at was not true, and take the matter to court. He had the option, by way of a ticket being levied against him for speeding, of paying that fine without delay or going to contest it in court. In 2026, Mr. President, that's what is before this honorable chamber. Giving Barbadians the opportunity, when faced with a traffic offense listed in the legislation, to make a decision. Am I going to humble myself and acknowledge that I did the wrong thing, that I was speeding, that I crossed lanes improperly? This morning, Mr. President, actually, I was coming down the road. I was driving down Colomara, and 2 lanes of traffic coming down. We were by Purity, and there was a woman with a male passenger in her seat, in her car, and she was driving up. But 2 lanes of traffic coming down, and she has stopped on the lane going towards Colomara. And she is carrying on and cussing because nobody in the lanes coming down is stopping for her to turn into Purity. But when I stopped, Mr. President, I stopped and watched her antics, but there's a double lane, a double solid yellow line there that she's not supposed to turn right at. Yeah, maybe she did think it was decoration, but she was willfully and arrogantly trying to break the law, and vexed that people were not facilitating her in so doing. If a police officer had come up there at that time and had observed her, indicators on and all, attempting to turn across a double line, she would have had an option. Acknowledge that you were doing foolishness, you were breaking the law, and you were not entitled to be mad at anybody for not letting you across in front of them because you were crossing 2 lanes of traffic to turn into Purity. And you're not supposed to do that. Or she could decide to be willful and powerful foolish and go to court and decide to contest it. That's what this legislation gives you the opportunity to do. It gives you the opportunity to choose whether to acknowledge right or wrongdoing and to pay the fine up front. But in instances where whether you are wrong is questionable and you feel that you have a solid case that you want to contest, only then do we go into the court system to have them make a definitive judgment on whether you are to pay a fine or not. Now, that brings me to the second part of this legislation and why this legislation is important. Mr. President, if I, as a young 18-year-old, had to go and stand up in court with nothing else to do with my life at the time because I was on vacation from university and I was home from being overseas, that is one matter. But if I am a professional, if I'm a single mother, if I am a shop owner, if I am a vendor, if I am a Barbadian who has a business to run and I'm a sole proprietor and I have picked up a traffic ticket for an offense, a ticketable offense, and I have to go to the courts, the current system of the courts will not allow me to simply go in and say, yes, no, here is my money, here is my $50 or whatever the fine is, and I want to pay it and go on back about my business. The system means that you have to give up, as it stands now, a whole day sitting in traffic court under the current system, waiting for your case to be called. That's productive time, Mr. President. That is productive time in a Barbados that we say in 2026 has to be respectful not of people's time, but wants greater levels of productivity. That is an anachronistic system that this government is attempting to move away from. So the first point, Mr. President, is that you can choose. No, it's to pay the ticket or contest the fines, thereby thinning the density of the number of persons having to go into the court system. So rather than 100% of persons with tickets going into the court system, it is only persons who want to contest whether they actually deserved a ticket or not going into the court system. That reduces the density, takes the burden off of the traffic system, and allows for persons to get on with their lives. Now, the third layer of that, Mr. President, is how do you then deal with persons who are accumulating multiple tickets? I have seen instances under the current legislation in the way that it is structured without the demerit system being in place, which is the second layer that is now being addressed, where persons commit traffic offenses, sometimes horrific traffic offenses, where lives are lost. And we've seen instances, especially in public service vehicles, where lives are lost. And when you look at the record of this driver, they have hundreds of accumulated tickets, but they're still driving. Owners know this, and they're letting them still drive their vehicles. Operators know this, and they're still driving their vehicles because they presume that until such time as they get around to having a court date in the traffic court system, with all of the backlog that is there, they will just continue doing what they feel like doing. This system now introduces a demerits system. It says you can do wrong some of the time, but you can't do wrong all of the time. That's really what the legislation is saying here. It is saying to people that wrongdoing, like the woman who was driving up by Purity this morning and vexed with people, is not something that this country should be sanctioning. It ought not to matter who does it if you think you are entitled to do the wrong thing versus somebody else. If it's wrong, period. And if you are so clear in your mind as to what wrongdoing is, my mother always used to tell me, know for yourself first. My Sunday school teacher always used to tell me, you take the speck out of the mote out of your eye, Nurev, before you attempt to take the speck out of somebody else's. You cannot behave poorly and speak about others and their behavior. So we have to be able now, in this legislation, to hold people accountable. The days of persons accumulating racks and racks and racks of paper by way of tickets and still driving on the nation's roads and causing damage to life and limb really have come to an end with this legislation and the introduction of the demerit points. What it also does, Mr. President, is it allows, if you get a certain number of points demerited from your license, your driving record, like in other jurisdictions, including in the United States, where many Barbadians come and they go and they travel and they rent a car, they get to Miami International Airport, they get a car, they pick up a car from in the car park area where they have all the rental cars, and they drive out to the airport, and boom, they're gone. And for the entire time that they're there, they've rented a vehicle and they're driving. So, Mr. President, you can't continue to drive with your license intact if you have racked up a certain number of demerit points. There will be a point, just like when you are in the United States driving, where your license will be revoked. This legislation allows for us to do that. So one, it establishes the ticketing system, it strengthens the penalties, it establishes the minister setting those fines, those penalties by order, and it establishes the demerit framework, but it also takes important strain off of the court burden, off the court system. So that's really what this two-page legislation and its amendments are about. Is this the sum total of the overall reform of the road traffic system? I would probably have to say it can't be. There are any other number of things that we expect that through the Ministry of Transport and Works dealing with the transportation system that we expect that they're going to come along the way with. So what is expected here now, Mr. President? The Ministry of Transport and Works has indicated that there's meant to be a public education campaign so that in very simple terms, people understand what is being done. It simply means, one, you are protecting people's time. Two, you're protecting people from having to waste time in the court system. How many times, Mr. President, when you want to go to a doctor, you go into the doctor, especially Some doctors are in here, and you spend the whole day sometimes in the waiting room, waiting to be seen, or hours waiting to be seen. I remember certainly with my GP, and my GP has been my GP since I was 16 years old. I'm a creature of habit. So once I lock in, I lock in. So we've now built a relationship whereby if I have an appointment, especially my annuals, I will call. His nurse knows me, has known me since I was 16, and they will say, all right, Lisa, we're running a little bit late today. My appointment is supposed to be at X time. Don't come yet. We'll call you maybe 30 minutes out, ready for you. And they will call me because if they're running behind, I don't want to waste time sitting in the office when I could be doing other things. Or alternately, I will go early in the morning. But the point here, Mr. President, is that when we build relationships, especially over long periods of time, we come to figure out how to save time because we're so used to going in other places where we have zero control over the time that we spend. And there are people who may not have as stellar a driving record as I do, and who may have had experiences in traffic court, unlike me, but they may have had the experience. I've heard people say, Mr. President, that they sit down and they waited a whole day for their case to be called, and then at the end of the day, they didn't get their case called, and they got to come back again. So they haven't even just wasted one full day, but they've gone back again. So, Mr. President, quite frankly, this is 2026, and I know that we're talking about technology, I know that we're talking about payment systems online, I know we're talking about making things easier, but ultimately, this is about making business in this country easier for Barbadians. This is about simplifying Barbadians' interactions with the state so that everything, and certainly for me as the minister with responsibility for business, every interaction with the state ought not to be a pain point. It really ought not to be. Every interaction with the state ought not to be something that you have to hold your head and say, Lord have mercy, let me prepare myself to go in this government office now. I really want to have to deal with that. This takes a lot of that away. And it gives people the opportunity, Mr. President, to choose how they want to interact. Do I want to interact online? Do I want to save my time and not argue and claim right when I know I'm wrong? And if I want to claim right because I know I'm right, then I will go to the court and I will navigate the system in that way. And so, Mr. President, this is the two-page amendment before this honorable chamber. It is intended to create greater law and order on our roads, to instill greater discipline, to be able to manage with efficiency the administration of justice on the roads, as well as in our court system, to lend itself to judicial efficiency gains, to allow for administrative flexibility, and also to align with the best practices that we see in other jurisdictions when we travel. It aligns, Mr. President, with the experience that I described over 15 years ago in South Africa. It aligns, Mr. President, with the last person in this honorable chamber who went to Miami and rented a car at Miami International Airport and drove out. This is what we see everywhere else we go, and Barbados is now introducing this system. And so I want to support this legislation, Mr. President, obviously as the one who is introducing it, and beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
The question is not this, sorry, no speakers? The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. You think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that you do not leave the chair and the Senate resolves itself into committee for further deliberation on this bill.
The question is that they do not leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Honorable, the Senate is now in committee.
Madam Chair, clauses 1 through 4. Madam Chair, I beg to move that clauses 1 through 4 stand part.
The question is that clauses 1 through 4 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye?
Aye.
All those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye?
Aye.
Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
The President has reported the passing of one bill in committee. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill not be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Road Traffic Amendment Act 2026.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Road Traffic Amendment Act 2026. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Mr. President, order number 10, in the name of the Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to rescind a resolution passing by the Honorable the House of Assembly on the 19th day of July 2022 and the Honorable the Senate on the 10th day of August 2022 and published in the Official Gazette as resolution number 17/2022 on the 18th day of August 2022 to approve the vesting in the National Housing Corporation of 2 parcels of land situated at Sergeant's Village in the parish of Christchurch in this island for a public purpose, namely housing development.
Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg your permission to treat to orders number 10 and 11 as a cognate debate.
The question is the orders number 10 and 11. 10 dealing with the resolution to rescind the resolution previously passed, and 11 to pass a new resolution in relation to the same parcel of land. For the benefit of those in my hearing, the two matters, if the Honourable Senate agrees to be debated in terms of the policy issues, however, they'll be voted on individually as per our rules. The question is that items number 10 and 11 be dealt with as a cognate debate. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye?
Aye.
Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Accordingly, we will treat items number 10 and 11 as a cognate debate. Senator Cummins, please proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. In 2022, in this honourable chamber, I actually went back to my notes on this bill from 2022. I went back to my notes, yeah. And at the time, the resolution on the vesting of this piece of land at Sergeant's Village, there were a couple of things that I made reference to at the time. We talked about the fact that the acquisition of 1,222.2 square meters in one instance and 5,798.8 square meters in the other instance, constituting a total of 7,021 square meters, was being vested for the purpose of creating housing opportunities at Sergeant's Village. In my notes, it tells me that I said we were back at the House to vest the parcel of land in the National Housing Corporation. That is what was said in the other place, and it is what was said in this place in 2022. It said at the time that this is government's main housing executing arm, and they are intent on providing housing solutions for Barbadians. It went on to say, Mr. President, that the lands to be vested in the NHC at the time were formally owned, and it listed the names of the persons, and they were shown on a plan dated August 26, 2021, and recorded at the Lands and Surveys Department on September 1st, 2021. This was the basis on which the Attorney General certified that the resolution was fit to be introduced into Parliament, but by way of Cabinet's approval for, as I said, the vesting of these lands in the NHC. Fast forward to where we are now, Mr. President, because despite what was said in the other place, and despite what I know was said in this place in 2022, by way of administrative error, what was published was not what was debated, and it was not what was approved by the Parliament. And I chose, Mr. President, to make sure that I anchored this debate today, because I had to go back to my own notes and to my transcripts from 2022, which did say at the time the land was to be vested in the National Housing Corporation. This, however, was not what was published, and the impact of that, Mr. President, as things happen, these things can happen, but the implications of them happening are sometimes dire for persons down the way. And here is where I start, Mr. President, because the persons in Sergeant's Village who are hoping by the end of this month to be in a position to have the housing solutions that have been built in the intervening period as a consequence of, one, the acquisition, two, the vesting as debated in both chambers, that those persons are now in a position where clean title cannot be transferred because of an administrative error when it reached the Gazette. And so what was published is not what we in this chamber debated or what the other place would have approved. And so as a consequence, Mr. President, it became clear that the published resolution contained two specific errors that required both the Cabinet to rectify it, which the Cabinet did late last year, and the Parliament now has attempted to rectify. It inadvertently omitted to state the entity in which the lands were to be vested, namely the NHC. Equally, Mr. President, it assigned the lands to the persons who originally the lands had been acquired from and not from the state. The lands had already been acquired by the state, and it made incorrect reference to the two private individuals that I mentioned before. And so in consultation with the Parliament, the clerks, whose judgment we are all guided by as to how best to proceed so that clean title would not inhibit the handing over of these properties to persons who are eagerly awaiting them being handed over to them, the Clerk of Parliament gave advice that recommended that the errors and omissions in the document purported to have been passed, but the transcripts don't support, purported to have been passed in the two houses of Parliament should therefore have amendments made, and that the corrected resolution should be placed on the order paper and the original one rescinded so that it was absolutely clear and title was absolutely clean to allow for final handover to the ultimate beneficiaries, who are those Barbadians who are anxiously awaiting their homes. And if many of us would recall those moments where we have the benefit of getting those keys to a home for the first time, this is something that I think we all want to be able to support on behalf of Barbadians. And so what the Parliament, what the Chamber is being asked to do today, Mr. President, quite simply, is to correct that administrative snafu and to be able to, one, rescind the original resolution and correct it for the record so that the conveyancing, the lawyers, and all of those persons who understand what goes into conveyancing are in a position to transfer clean title over to the beneficiaries of this project at Sergeant's Village. And I certainly am looking forward to being able to say that we have contributed in this Senate chamber to those persons having that benefit. And so with these very few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this resolution do not pass.
Thank you, Senator Cummins. Senator Walters.
Thank you, Mr. President. This resolution gives me the opportunity to deal with an issue that has been discussed in the lower house and now meet the media this morning, where, Mr. President, the senior minister of government is saying that there has been a fantastic job from HOPE. HOPE, Inc. is an entity that was created by the Barbados Labour Party government about 4 or 5 years ago. And it decided that its mandate was to construct affordable housing for Barbados with renewable energy solutions, etc. It was part of their plan then, and this is what the government has said, that with a system in building 2,000 homes a year. It was revealed by the leader of the opposition that there was something fishy with the happenings in HOPE. He spoke about the high consultancy fees. He spoke about not having clear title for some of the properties that they were hoping to develop, among other things. So much so, Mr. President, that the Prime Minister herself indicated to the public of Barbados that she would ask for an audit of HOPE. Nevertheless, Mr. President, the audit office did produce a document, and the document is entitled The Special Audit on the Building Programs of the Home Ownership Providing Energy, Inc., Mr. President. And that was laid in Parliament. But Mr. President, seeing the remarks from this senior minister and hearing some of what he said in Parliament, it is my duty to correct or to guide Barbadians to the content of the Auditor General's report.
Just for clarity, though, how does this link to the resolution before us? Is HOPE an entity involved with this resolution?
Well, Mr. President, it has to do with housing in Barbados, and we know that the HOPE Inc. is tied to one of the key metrics for this government in terms of producing housing. So I thought, same way it was being afforded the opportunity to be debated in the other place, I assume, Mr. President, that I would have the same attitude as it speaks to housing in this country.
It would be relevant if you link it with the resolution. So far, you've risen, you said you want to speak about HOPE. I just want you, for the purity of the process, to tie it in a bit. Yes, there are many aspects of housing, but just make sure that you make some connection with the resolution which is before us, even if that then involves some HOPE.
Yes, Mr. President. As I said, it's part of the government's housing plan to develop housing, and the report, Mr. President, that I'm referring to speaks about directly developing housing in this country as well. Mr. President, the question around housing has to do with money sent to an entity that has the responsibility to do just what is being done in Sergeant's Village, Mr. President, which is to create housing for citizens or low-income housing for citizens. But Mr. President, to elaborate a bit on what has been happening at the Hope project is to give clarity to what the Auditor General found at Hope. And if you allow me, Mr. President, I would not be long. It is really just to give some clarity and balance, as was with this morning, where we had some discussions back and forth on our own perceptions of what is happening in tourism. And what the Auditor General said, Mr. President, is that with this whole project, there were no clear objectives or clear milestones set to deal with key performance indicators. Mr. President, $64.5 million of taxpayers' money was committed to the government to enfranchise low-income earners so that they could afford a home. Mr. President, it was revealed that the state was then exposed to legal claims and possibly compensation, given the fact that they proceeded with transactions which they had no authority to do, Mr. President, and in some cases where there was no clear title. Additionally, Mr. President, the decisions taken by the management at Hope also put additional burden on taxpayers because the Auditor General identified that $37.8 million in additional costs would have been taken, would have to be going into the project to build homes choosing precast over traditional block construction, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, to fulfill a mandate to use our limited resources to expand into areas of Sergeants Village or other constituencies across the country, we need to understand that funds are put at the disposal of government so that they can be prudent in this mandate. It is amazing, Mr. President, that this is so fundamentally important because one of the core mandates of Hope was to provide housing for persons that earn less than $4,000 a month. And that, Mr. President, was adjusted by the government to $6,000, which meant that they did not even provide the housing at a financial level that an ordinary man can obtain the house or woman, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, without even going into the structures at Sergeants Village, without even going into who was the contractor and if there were small contractors or if there were large contractors, if there were precast buildings or if there were traditional block construction, Mr. President, the fact remains it's critical that Hope Inc. continues to be questionable by the people of this country and that there is a gray cloud hovering over that entity called Hope Inc., which persons that pay taxes in this country would like some answers to. In addition, Mr. President, the renewable energy promise also failed. We understood that almost every household will have a renewable energy solution on it, and the Auditor General found that 2 homes had renewable energy solutions on them, Mr. President. What is more disturbing is that the National Housing Corporation, in which land is being invested in at Sergeants Village, Mr. President, also, it was reviewed by the Auditor General that they sent $3.5 million to Guyana for about 60 homes to be built. This is hardwood homes, Mr. President. And Mr. President, the arrangement was such that there was no performance bond in place and that the supplier that was chosen had no experience to perform at that level. So the government then actually put our financial resources at significant risk by entering into that arrangement. But additionally, when the homes finally arrived to be assembled, Mr. President, there were missing key parts, they were incomplete, and it is estimated by the Auditor General, Mr. President, that the government will lose $125,000 per home. In this case, it means that the government would not lose, but would have to pay through the taxpayers of this country an additional $125,000 for every home that is assembled here that was purchased from Guyana under the National Housing Corporation. And that loss, Mr. President, is actually accounting for $43.7 million if this government continues to go on the trajectory of building those homes and importing those homes and assembling those homes from Guyana, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, the record of this government in housing is nothing to be proud about. It is very disheartening that a senior minister will get up and say and make those claims, those glowing claims about Hope Inc., Mr. President, because the facts are there, and I would urge every Barbadian to go and read for themselves the report. Further, it is of great concern that for every year that Hope has been operating, there has been no financial audited reports provided to the House or to the public of this country, which means that Barbadians have every right to be skeptical about what is going on at Hope Inc. as relates to the financial mismanagement, as relates to the contracts that they enter into, and as it relates to possible squandermania coming from Hope, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, we in the Democratic Party always encourage for affordable low-income houses. We have a stellar record between 2008 and 2018 with providing various types of housing solutions, low-income solutions for Barbadians. This government has failed the people of Barbados, and in the process of failing, they have wasted over $60 million through Hope, Mr. President, and another $20 million or so through the National Housing Corporation directly as they sought to import houses from Guyana rather than use our skilled artisans, our small contractors to build the housing stock for our people. That's another story. So, Mr. President, thank you for allowing me the time to respond.
Thank you very much, Senator Walters. If there are no more speakers, Senator Cummings, please wind up.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I want to attempt very briefly and briefly is going to be the word, to respond to Senator Walters, who did not even attempt to collide with the resolution except to say housing and the word Sergeant's Village on two separate occasions. But I can assure you that on receipt of a full report from the Auditor General, because if memory serves me well, the report that has come in has been sent back for some additional information to be supplied so that there is in a position to have not just the Auditor General's report, but the report that the Prime Minister did speak about in the other place as an investigation. And I expect that, having promised it, as the government of Barbados has done, it will be delivered. And with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time. I beg to move this resolution do not pass.
The question is that resolution number 10 to rescind the resolution previously passed by both the Honorable House of Assembly and the Senate in 2022 in relation to the vesting of land in National Housing Corporation at Sergeant's Village in Christchurch for housing development, that this resolution do not pass. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The ayes have it. This resolution is now passed.
Order number 11, in the name of the Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to approve in accordance with Section 5 of the Crown Lands Vesting and Disposal Act, Cap 225, the vesting in the National Housing Corporation of a parcel of land, the property of the state, situated at Sergeant's Village in the parish of Christchurch in this island for housing development.
Mr. President, I beg to move this resolution do not pass.
The question is that resolution number 11, in relation to the corrected vesting details in relation to the National Housing Corporation and Sergeant's Village, do not pass. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The things the ayes have it.
Mr. President, order number 4, in the name of the Leader of the Senate, to resume the debate on the passing of a resolution that the Parliament of Barbados take note of the 2023 to 2028 National Policy on Aging.
Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. President. And we started debate on this resolution a few weeks ago, and it was led off by the Leader of Government Business on the aging policy of aging for Barbados. And these debates, I do believe, gives us an opportunity to project into the future as to where the country is going and look at the type of legislation and the framework which would be necessary for this country going forward. And we are looking at dealing with an aging population. In Barbados, we do have quite a few persons. We have a history of actually celebrating almost on a monthly basis a centenarian. And we do have the tradition where our Governor General, as it was in the past, and now currently the President, visit those persons and share in that and those occasions. I do believe that at one point in time we had from St. George, who was 114 or 113. Right, James Sisnet from St. George, 113 years, St. Luke. And in St. John, we have a centenarian who I believe celebrated her 108th birthday just a few weeks ago. Right. And right, so we do have quite a few centenarians all across Barbados, many of which are still batting well after that century. But we need to look at the demographics across the country. So in looking at the policy on aging which was done and some of the recommendations, it gives us scope to really address some issues regarding active aging in Barbados and aging with dignity in Barbados, and also creating the security framework for our elderly to actually still contribute to the society and be cared for in their golden or silver years. So, Mr. President, I rise to make my contribution to this debate based on the policy, but it gives us an opportunity, Mr. President, to speak generally about some of the things that we've been observing in this country as it relates to our elderly. Now, many of us will have, I had the privilege of taking care of a great-grandmother who died at 94. After my father died, my brother and I, we were her sole caregivers for my great-grandmother. She lived on her own because she preferred to live on her own up until she could not, when she had to be taken into the hospital, and unfortunately, she never returned from the hospital. And I would always regard that as an experience that I wish I could live over. I wish that she was still here, because you got to experience that oral history, to have a great-grandmother that can tell you where she was on the day of the 1937 riots, and how she dealt with it, how someone hid her under a bed, and all of those stories. She, even at 93, she still had a very good memory, and she followed what was going on the call-in program. She followed what was happening in politics. At that time, I would leave work, sometimes during my lunch hour, and go to her to warm her lunch, and then come back. We are having a serious conversation today, Mr. President. So I'm not really in the interest of collecting any eggs today. So as the hens cackle, I will ignore that, Mr. President. But I believe that all Barbadians should have that joyous experience of actually being able to share with an elderly person and learn the history of Barbados as told by those persons, and how Barbados has changed, how they saw it during that time, the struggles that they went through, the opportunities which they had, the things that kept them grounded as elderly persons, because we still need to be able to share that. That is part of our culture. And we need to provide opportunities where our elderly persons don't feel as though they need to be pushed aside or they don't have anything to contribute to society. But that is our lived history and culture which need to be shared. And how best to share it by reminiscing with those persons and hearing their stories and their experience. Some would still be able to tell you the best way to make conkeys, the best way to stir kakoo to avoid the lumps, all of those things, all of those, and how to keep white clothing pearly white. With the blue soap and putting them on the juking board, and then the mesh that you would have outside, and doing all those things. Many things that a lot of our young people don't do. If Tide does not work, we discard it. Correct. If Tide does not work today, we discard it. Correct. So, but that is all part of our history and the value of having our seniors living amongst us and participating in our communities. And that's why to have a policy on aging which speaks to active aging and also speaks to persons aging with dignity is important. And looking out for the environmental structures that are needed, the family and the healthcare support structures which will be necessary, the financial support and legal support structures which will also be necessary. Because as we age, things change for a family. And from the policy which we have before us, a lot of research was done into the demographics of Barbados. And it does outline that the majority of our population is over that age of 65. So that means that many of us will probably be in households or close to persons with our parents and grandparents gradually reaching the age where they need to be cared for. And then the idea of a grandparent is also changing, because you also have to deal with that concept as well. before you look at a grandmother as the hawker with the basket on top of her head, going, waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning to go to the market. But now you have the savvy grandmother who can use the iPad just the same as you do, who can use, right, who can use the phone and the WhatsApp. And of course, yes, you will still have persons like my mother who still have difficulty with the with some of the remotes. Who have difficult, so you have two different types of grandparents now that we have to deal with, because all now I'm having a challenge getting my mother accustomed to the Fire Stick remote that has the circle instead of the arrows. So, therefore, we need to have a society. Therefore, we need in our society be able to deal with both types of grandparents and elderly, and allow our elderly to be able to live and not to be dependent on other persons, to have as much independence as possible in their later years. Structures would need to be put in place in order to facilitate that. Because there's the other side of it now, where as you're growing older, the NCDs are also increasing, which the report outlined, that more and more persons are developing stroke, there's hypertension, and then there's also dementia as well. And we live in a Barbados where there are a number of persons who are actually caring for an elderly person with dementia. And oftentimes that is not easy. And it would mean that if you have 3 or 4 siblings, that usually one of the siblings have to give up work and other responsibilities and take on the responsibility of caring for that parent who may have dementia, who may be suffering from arthritis and may be bedridden and can't get around, because there's dementia, but there's also high case incidence of arthritis as well, which are causing many of our elderly persons difficulty in moving around and being able to manage their lives. There's also Parkinson's disease as well. Many of these things are not easy to deal with. And even if you try to keep the person within the household, it is sometimes hard, and it's something that requires 24-hour support. So as a country, how do we go about assisting those families who have to provide that support? I know that here in Barbados, we have the National Assistance Board, which does provide a good service for a number of years in having persons go to the houses during the day to do some of the domestic work around the house and also to take care of some of those elderly persons. But there comes a time that you need to go a little bit further. And what I would like to see happening in the country is that instead of families having to make that decision to take their loved ones to the district hospitals or to a nursing home, that the first step is provisions made that the family can care for the individual at home. Because in that environment, they will get the best care possible. But it also comes with some caveats as well. Now, I mentioned that you have a sibling who would have to give up their job. I believe that we need to come to a stage where we recognize that that the state may need to find a way to compensate that individual, because oftentimes the other siblings may not have the means to compensate that individual, but they still have their children to take care of, they still have their personal needs to take care of, they still have their home and maybe even a mortgage to pay. But it is important that the mother or the father or even a brother or sister is cared for. So I do not think it would be beyond the means of a government of Barbados, any government, to put within the care of the elderly provision that in a situation where the person will be cared for in the home, that the family member who takes on the responsibility to provide the full-time care for that person, oftentimes on a 24-hour basis, be compensated. Because when you look at it, it may still end up being a saving to the government. Because if the alternative would be to place that person in the geriatric hospital, which the majority of the time the care and the expense falls at the government, right? You have another bed that is available to someone else who may need it more in the geriatric hospital. And you have a loved one that will be cared for within their family. And oftentimes, when an elderly relative goes into a geriatric hospital or elder care facility, they give up. It seems to them as though their family has abandoned them, even though it's not that the family has abandoned them, but the family has reached the end of their ability to actually care for them in the home environment. Because you also need to recognize that caring for someone also has a psychological toll on the caregiver. And you also need to make provisions for that as well in any policy dealing with the care of the elderly, so that you provide avenues and opportunities for this caregiver, one, to be compensated, two, for have mental health days so that they can have a break from that actual care and take care of themselves. Because we do know of some situations where a family member may have been taking care of a sick individual, but then the person who's taking care of the sick individual is the one who actually dies first, because they neglect themselves over that period of time, right? And exactly, they break down. It is depressing. It feels as though you have to give up your life, that you don't have anything else to do. It is just this. And then sometimes in that situation, they may also take out their frustration on the rest of the family or the individual that they're caring for. So you need to have a holistic approach to how we deal with this and put steps and measures in place that the person can be compensated, that provisions are made for their mental health and their physical well-being, and that they have this support structure around them. You can still have the persons coming in from the National Assistance Board and other agencies participating in the care of that person. So that is one recommendation which the Democratic Labour Party freely offers as we consider this policy on aging. Given the 11th hour and the timing, we may very well be the administration which will implement the policy. So we are freely offering to the government and to the people of Barbados an idea of our way of thinking and what they can expect from a Democratic Labour Party government. But, Mr. President, in looking at aging, we want to also age with dignity. So there are a few things that we must consider. Now, we agree that we have an aging population, and the majority of our workforce will probably be in their late 50s, 60s. We have a smaller amount of persons in younger categories, 25-year-olds and so forth, in the younger workforce. And in Barbados, we rely heavily on the national insurance for the payment of pensions. So if we acknowledge that the elderly are outstripping the working population, every opportunity for a young person to work and contribute to the national insurance is going to be very important in this society. So that is one of the things that we will urge in terms of job opportunities for our young people, where they have the ability to pay national insurance and contribute to the National Insurance Fund. Now, how do we see our young people, our elderly persons, sorry, at 65 and 70? For me personally, I believe that at a certain age, after you have worked over 30 years or 40 years in some instance, once you reach the age of 60 and you choose that you do not want to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to have to go to work or to work for anyone, that you should have that ability to retire. And this is the time, perhaps, where you can help your children in terms of raising their children. As a grandmother, that is your role in terms of helping your children to raise their grandchildren. And this is what we are missing in this society. We don't have that exchange any longer with, because many of our grandparents are out working, and we need that supervision of the children when they come home from school. I'm certain that there are many of us who would have benefited from having a grandparent or an aunt who provided that assistance to your mother, or even to yourself with your children, while you were out there working at university studying, you had that assistance within the family network, an aunt, an uncle, a grandmother who would be able to collect the children from school, make sure that they were fed by the time you get home, supervise them in doing the homework until you can make it back home from work or from studies after 6, 7 o'clock in the evening, but you know that your children were taken care of. The point I'm making, sir, is that in this day and age, to be taking our elderly persons down the road to 70 to wait for retirement, I don't necessarily know if that can be considered aging in dignity. It should be an option if you choose that you want to work up to that stage, but I am referring to the policies by the National Insurance which were introduced last year, which changed the early retirement age from 60 in 2025, and it is now 61 as of 2025. And then we know that if there is a plan for that early retirement age to rise to 62 in 2028 and 63 in 2031. And then for the pensionable age to move from 67, where it is currently, to 67.5 in 2028 and 68 in 2034. And you have the option to retire, to work longer up until age 70. If a person chooses to work up until age 70, that's their choice. Where I differ is the point at which you can start early retirement. And I believe that in allowing people to age with dignity, that ability to retire early at age 60, we should look to try to maintain that as much as possible as a country, and not to take our pensionable age so far down the road that we're going to 68, 67, 68. I believe that that is taking it a bit too far, because at the same time, you recognize that aging population, but the non-communicable diseases are increasing. You have more people suffering from arthritis and all of those things, who you have to look at how can they actively function in the workplace. Someone who, if the rain falls this morning, they know they can't make it to work, or if they make it to work, they have a bad day. And you expect that that person would have to be struggling in a work site. We don't know what they're doing. All of them would not have a comfortable job where they sit in an office, but some may actually have to have jobs where they actually stand on their feet for the entire day, right? So the only alternative should not having to go to a doctor and hope to be medically boarded. If persons can retire early, allow them the dignity to do so, and I'm certain that you will get more out of that individual after retirement, because we are seeing a number of persons retiring or a couple years before retirement actually, having a stroke or dying and not actually making that retirement. So we would want for persons to be able to retire with a bit of dignity, to still be able to have some life and some youthfulness in them and energy that they can get around and enjoy the retirement just like anyone else, and also actively contribute to their families and society, so that we can have Q on a Thursday, on a Wednesday, Tuesdays, and Sundays, whenever they choose to. But Q on a Sunday is church. Q on a Sunday is church, and lunch after at church, right? But have active aging for our elderly. And the goal that there's such a thing as a silver economy. So we're coming to that. If we allow more of our elderly persons to retire early, at 60, we have to find recreational activity for them to do. Because they will be at a stage where they're still active, they're still able to drive around, they're still able to walk around, they're still able to get out and socialize. So you can be having morning brunches and craft parties, all sorts of things for our elderly. Tea parties in the evening if they so choose, cuckoo days, or cassava parties, whatever they want to call it. But the point is that you will have a booming silver, you would have a booming silver economy. The eggs now getting addled, Mr. President. A booming silver economy in this country. And that is something that we should look forward to. And not only that, but you have, going back to the period of COVID, the pensioners carried a lot of families during that time because their pension was secured and it was guaranteed. And if you have persons who are getting a secure and guaranteed pension, they will be able to invest and spend a little bit more around, and may even be investing in their grandchildren and any business ideas which they have, or their children's business ideas, and spending on recreational activities for themselves, doing tours, going to the restaurants, going to the bars, taking part in church events and activities, and also giving back to society. An opportunity for our elderly to give back more to society. Because you have retired teachers who may still be able to give back to their society by offering lessons or reading programs to the children within the community, or provide mentorship to some young people, persons within the community. All of these are things that can be done with an aging society if we allow our people to age actively, with dignity, and not to be restricted by working to 68, 67, when all that you can do on claiming retirement is to find a chair to sit in and watch Days of Our Lives, or Beyond the Gates as it is now. Beyond the Gates now. Right. But right. But Mr. President, that is all part of active aging. And we need to find opportunities and avenues. A lot of our elderly persons are getting into the gym. They're the ones that you see on mornings on the road or in the evening. They're walking. I don't know if the hot pot is still a major trend for the elderly. They don't just go there, but you know that hot water with arthritis does wonders. So I have been told. Well, it seems as though the doctors may differ, but the elderly definitely believe that hot water does wonders, and after they come out of the hot pot on mornings, they feel like they feel as though they're a totally new person. But again, it allows for recreational activity for our elderly and our elderly to get out there and to be involved in the community. We also need to look at the health situation as you have more aging persons, you will need to have access to a wider range of healthcare services. So you may need to have wider access to the podiatrist. You may need to have more access to the chiropractor. And all of those things that you will need as persons age. And we need to develop a routine within this country where at a certain age that as part of the national insurance program that you're required to have certain tests. So we're going beyond the regular pap smear, mammogram, and also tests for prostate cancer. But you need to include in this, I would hope that we can get to the stage, but the doctors may laugh at me, CAT scans and possibly MRIs. But if you're having such a challenge, no, with getting the regular patients to have these services. But I believe that you can see the benefit of having some of these things done on a regular basis once you reach a certain age. I do believe there's a need for a study in Barbados because there are a lot of persons, not just the elderly, who only turn up at the doctor if there's a major injury, but not realizing that they have an elevated blood pressure for a number of years, or they have an elevated blood sugar or cholesterol for a number of years, and it has not been identified, and it has gone unchecked and unrecognized. So as our society age, I believe that we need to reach a stage where once you reach a certain age, probably starting from 35, repeating again at 40, 45, and going up, that you need to have medicals, prescribed medicals, and the doctors can determine what areas need to be looked at certain ages. In terms of tests for colon cancer, all of these things need to be included in routine medical examinations for a country such as Barbados with an aging population, so that you can detect some of these illnesses before and at a stage where they can be treated, so that if someone is developing diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol, that you can bring the appropriate intervention before the stage where they need to be on medication, because if you catch it early enough, exercise program and changing the diet may actually work to bring it back under control. But if you wait to the stage where it can only now be controlled with medication, once you start the medication, you don't easily get off. And then when you test for different cancers, and if you detect them early, in prostate cancer, colon cancer, they may be able to be treated at an earlier stage and extend the life of the individual. So we need to include measures such as this, routine medical examinations with the regimen varying based on the age range, and it will leave it to the medical doctors to determine at what age you test for what, which area and go on. But that is something that needs to be done. Also, access to, I mentioned it before, but you need the chiropractor. Because you wake up one morning, you have an ache and a pain, and the only thing that seems to work out wonders for you is to get that adjustment by a chiropractor. Things like that we need to put into expanding the number of areas which offers this service and let it become a part of the regular routine. Even simple things such as a massage might also make a difference to a number of persons. When you have different ailments, a massage, or, you know, beyond the regular exercise, but the whole holistic way of living your life. All of these are things that we need to put into place to make sure that we have an aging population, which is not necessarily a population that is ailing, but a population that is thriving and active. So, looking at Mr. President, the next area I would like to look at is the legal and the financial responsibilities. Now, In some instance, with some elderly persons, you have a difficulty with them accepting or giving over control to others. And in some cases, it is very difficult for a person who is in the early stages of developing dementia and other areas. This is where now you need to get a power of attorney for the individual, and you need to the family needs to make decisions on behalf of that individual. And it's oftentimes not easy to do that because for a good period of time, the person, are still able to challenge what you are doing, not recognizing the situation that they're in mentally with the onset of dementia. So we need to have more counselors available to guide families through this process, and lawyers trained in being able to assist families in this process, and definitely doctors as well, because you can't make the diagnosis without the intervention of a psychiatrist or a doctor actually making the diagnosis. But these are things that you need to educate the population about and have those things available. You will come into situations where a family recognize, look, I am not able to care for this individual in the family household because of whatever ailment they have, but the individual still wants to be in the household, and they end up in the hospital because of a medical reason, and then it's a challenge because the hospital also recognizes, look, this person needs to go into a long-term care facility, but you're still having the elderly person arguing that they can take care of themselves or they can go back to their home, and that becomes a problem. The social worker needs to step in. At what stage is it permitted for the state to step in as an arbitrator in that process and make a decision to determine, yes, the person can either take care of themselves or be provided with the assistance to take care of themselves in a home setting, or B, the individual needs to go to a care facility. Those are tough decisions to make for the family and also for the healthcare providers who are often in a balance. I'm certain that many of you would have heard stories of patients being left in accident and emergency who really ought not to be there, who should either be at home being cared for by their family or in the district hospital or geriatric hospital. But you can't force the person to go someplace where they don't want to go. And at some point in time, we have to make a determination how best do we deal with that challenge and what provisions are there for the state to step in and guide the process so that the person gets the best care that is available to them. All of these are things are challenges that people are currently facing now. And as we go into the future with more and more persons developing dementia, you will have more of these challenges with families not being able to care for their loved ones. The financing for the elderly as well. Now, at one point there was this motion or an argument for reverse mortgages to be done in Barbados, which tend to allow for elderly persons to have access to finances, which in the current environment they don't normally do. The way how the reverse mortgages would work, I believe that most people know how they work. Well, you would take out a mortgage on your existing house or property, and then after you die, that house or property will go to the lending institution. Some people argue that this prevents some families from being able to pass on properties to their children. There are some elderly persons who would want to go that route. And there's also the argument against it as well. We need to have the national discussion and education to determine which path we will take, and if it is indeed a way in which to provide long-term financing for our elderly, and which would also help them to be able to live out their life in dignity. I believe at this stage in our growth and development of this country, the care of the elderly is not only a challenge here in Barbados, but we do it a whole lot easier here and at a lower cost than what it would cost for you to take care of an elderly person in the UK or the US. So that means that there's also potential for it to be an industry that can be developed in Barbados where we can attract persons from overseas and develop elder care facilities, which are more like resorts for persons from overseas to come and reside here in Barbados. It's another avenue at long-term tourism. This is something that we can do because when you look at it, what it may cost for them to be cared for here in Barbados would be a fraction of the cost if they were cared for in a similar facility in the UK or in the US or Europe. And the environmental conditions, because it can be done, they have the warm sunshine 365 days of the year. Don't have to worry about the winter if you're coming from the US, the UK, or Canada. You have access to the beaches. You could be in close proximity to the beach or part of the program within the facility with regular visits to the beach. It would, and then the general tropical environment which you are in will add to any challenges which you may have, help you overcome any challenges which you may have. So if it is depression and you are sitting on that beach and you can enjoy the warm sunshine, it will help. If it is an ailment, it will help. So that is also an area which could become a niche industry for Barbados to pursue in offering those services, not just to Barbadians, but from persons from overseas. And again, I say, these are things that can easily be done and need to be considered as we look at the policy on aging. So we're no longer looking at an elderly person who would be shut up in the home, but we are looking at an active elderly person who is still contributing to society, and we are looking at ways of enhancing their quality of life in their golden years, so that hopefully that tradition of having the president go to visit centenarians will continue and the frequency will increase. But obviously we will have to get the health of our population at that level so that you can live to make it to that century and beyond. So with those few words, Mr. President, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Warren. Senator Dr. Connell.
Mr. President, it is my pleasure to rise to add my voice to this bill. Before I do so, however, I want to declare a few conflicts of interest. One, I work in the health fraternity, and therefore the part of the bill I was immediately attracted to looked specifically at healthy aging and that domain of health. Secondly, I suppose 20 years ago, I probably would have read this bill with a very abstract lens. But now, as I approach another decade milestone this year, there's a conflict of interest because what I am discussing here could very well, hopefully, relate to how my life is lived in the future. I'm not sure which decade is yet. Let me just start by framing my presentation and how I hope to deal with this, and I know one member of the Senate might be accustomed to this style. I will give you my general comments on the bill, and then I propose to use a case to describe some of the steps I think an elderly person might face navigating the space, not just the QEH or primary care, but the space, and then potentially identify some gaps that hopefully the bill might address or consider moving forward. So here are some impressive points, and I have to say, I read the bill over the holidays, the policy over the holidays, and I was immediately impressed with the style of writing, as well as the amount of research that went into this. The bill has been very well researched. The policy has been very well researched. Maybe I'm aging as well. The policy has been very well researched, and it's no surprise because I see some of my academic colleagues on the Hill have been involved in crafting it. I was also impressed at the fact that it made reference to international best practice by way of the WHO and other authorities speaking on aging and healthy, active aging. It also mentioned a legal framework because all these policies need to be embedded or be part of a solid legal framework. And I know that this policy was meant to address other matters outside of health, including elder abuse, as well as elder neglect. And of course, it was driven, and this is obvious from reading the document, by a burning platform, the COVID-19 pandemic, which exposed many gaps for elderly patients or elderly people living in our society, including access to care, access to affordable, healthy foods, as well as transportation and other barriers to an elderly person. So with those kind of introductory statements, I'm going to give you a case now, Mr. President, of a 78-year-old retired principal. So I captured the attention of more members of the Senate. I will say she was a retired principal at a secondary school near to the hospital. And she presents, she presents to her primary care doctor with her daughter, or son, it's irrelevant, at the Winston Scott Polyclinic. This is her first presentation ever to a polyclinic because for her entire life, she's been seen by a private doctor. The reason for the polyclinic visit is because she can no longer afford private care. She's now retired and therefore thought that, this is too expensive, I need to go to access public care, not just as a convenience.
Senator Connell, I'd like to interrupt you. Just some guidance. You haven't cast your fictional character in the context of known locations and so on. You may then want to either change your fictional character or so limit the level of detail so as not to excite any imaginations or guessing games by some as to who the person may be. They may be entirely wrong, but they may still, in the belief that they're great detectives, believe that they've identified Harry, maybe Susie, or nobody.
Right.
So you may just want to take note of that so that you do not inadvertently create any concern. That's what that thing.
Thank you, Mr. President. And yes, this is a fictional character, but possibly represents a prototype elderly patient navigating the health space. So there are challenges. Many elderly patients are faced making that decision. They can no longer afford private care. They have to attend the hospital or the polyclinic, and it's their first time navigating the space. It's extremely challenging. And I guess what many of us don't recognize is that there is a disconnect between private care and public care in our country. The ease of information sharing is not there. The ease of medical record sharing is not there, and so it's difficult, the first consultation. Of course, being in private care, you are afforded, I would say, a more comfortable standard in terms of things like waiting time. As most doctor's office, you usually wait for just under five minutes or so for your visit. Fictional. But of course, in public service, in public care, this is completely different. And so there's some apprehension. And every time I see a relative like this with a patient like this in public care, they're extremely agitated and want to know, why am I waiting here so long? This is not what I'm accustomed to when I interface with the health system. Making it even more difficult is the fact that the health system, I believe, is not designed in its current state or at best design for elderly patients. When I trained in internal medicine 20 years ago, I very much did not expect to be practicing, one could say, geriatric medicine, because a large proportion of patients at the hospital are geriatric patients, and the type of care that is administered and also the way they interact with the health system is completely different. Let me give you an example. So let's suppose this fictional character or person arrives at the emergency room. I heard on the call-in program this morning, someone making the comment that the seats in A&E are not for relatives, they're for patients. So don't expect to come to the emergency room with a relative and get a seat. If you do, that's fine, but it's not for relatives. But many elderly patients cannot navigate a health system without a relative or some other person acting on their behalf and giving information. One thing I have never understood in the hospital space is, why is it that relatives are not more actively involved in the care of patients? I was educated I did some of my training in another place where relatives were on the wards. They had their own accommodation, they had a comfortable couch or something, and they were able to stay overnight. And as medical doctors and nurses and healthcare specialists, we were very glad when this happened, because it meant that, one, you had someone to assist in care. Basic things like assisting in feeding, or the common effect that happens to patients, usually over 65, but elderly patients, as you come in hospital, you get what's known as a sundowning effect. You become delirious, and that we're not at risk of that happening. Or we are, because we can't see sunlight outside, but because you're not seeing sunlight, you're not quite sure, and you become disoriented, and you can become psychotic in some cases, and it can be misinterpreted as an acute psychotic episode. These things are real. Now imagine a hospital, proposing opening the windows, a hospital with 2 nurses, and all it takes is one patient to be agitated, and that destroys the whole dynamics of the ward. Nothing gets done. The patients around this person are upset. The relatives are embarrassed. All these things happen because the health system has not been reformatted for sane. Imagine if this was not the case, where relatives in an open ward could be there to assist in care. Elderly patients are a lot more comfortable when they see familiar faces. I'm not going to comment on whether they prefer their food from at home versus the hospital food, but we know the answer to that as well. Maybe not cuckoo though. So this is a challenge. This is a challenge. Now, the hospital system needs to reset, but also the primary care system as well. Let's just imagine again, and bear with me, Mr. President, an elderly patient coming to any of our polyclinics. What is a system in place to make sure that they have the smoothest pathway through the health system? I'm not just speaking about designated parking spots, but I have witnessed firsthand, a poor old lady, she would approach a polyclinic. Granted, there's a security pathway, metal detector you have to walk through. She's not even sure what she has to walk through, so again, now she's confused. Maybe a relative is not with her. The security guard says, empty your bag, right? Imagine you're an older person, you're just being told empty your bag, you're not sure why, what's happening, right? And it's difficult, And simple things like training staff how to interact with the elderly makes a huge difference. They make a huge difference. I have caught myself several times in speaking to older patients and in raising my voice, and I'm not raising my voice to say anything, and I'm saying things to them, and they'll say to me, well, I can hear you. So again, there's a bias, and training is necessary in order for this bias to be removed. And it happens, let me say, at all levels. Doctors, nurses, pharmacists, physiotherapists, it happens at all levels. So one thing I would like to see in this policy is that there is something in it that speaks to the urgent training of the health system or people, practitioners within the health system as we interact with elderly patients. It is a low-hanging fruit and it makes the experience completely different. I want to also address another matter which I think speaks more to our hospital system. And that is the fact that the elderly are also at risk from even short periods of immobility to becoming bedridden. Many instances, someone comes in with, let's just say, a flu infection or some minor infection that they normally, younger people might take 2 or 3 days in hospital and then are discharged once they're off oxygen and they've completed treatment. An elderly person cannot do that. What then happens is this person who was ambulant and fairly self-sufficient now has to rely on their relative for their activities of daily living because they can no longer walk around and do basic things. So that transition happens very quickly. Now, when you think about it, you are now saying to someone who, yes, might pass by and maybe assist in heating up some food, but is not living with that person, who now has a very dependent parent or grandparent they have to look after. And so many times, and I'm not saying that people should bring people to the hospital, their parents and grandparents, and leave them there, but I also at the back of my mind think this must be very difficult being faced with a new reality, that when I leave here, I now have to do all of this, plus go to work, plus look after my kids, plus all the other responsibilities. I'm torn between guilt and a health system that's saying, if I leave my mom here, you're a bad person. And ultimately, we want the best thing for our parents and grandparents. There are many times I've heard relatives say, listen, if she's at home, based on what I'm seeing that's happening here, I cannot provide this level of care. I'm not trained. She's going to deteriorate. Many instances, and we all know in our Caribbean society, some grandparents or some parents may not even be as close to the kids. And as a result, there's no connection there to begin with. But again, a son or a daughter may feel, maybe touched by divine intervention, that this is my parent, and whether I knew them growing up or not, I'm going to look after them. This is a challenge, Mr. President, and it's something that we have to address. I want us all in this Senate to divorce from the thought that aging is the only metric that we need to consider when looking at the elderly. Because if people are aging unhealthily, this is a huge challenge for a small island developing state like Barbados. It's not just managing diabetes and hypertension, although there are gaps in care there, but as another member has stated, it's all the other chronic conditions that come along with it, the arthritis, the dementia, the other forms of cognitive decline. Not everyone may be able to make it to the hot pot, but mobility challenges are significant. I have witnessed for myself people in my own family who are no longer able to go places or do things or feel safe to do them because of mobility challenges. But, Mr. President, they do not need to be in a long-term care facility. They don't. And I think this is a mistake where we assume just because someone cannot be 100% and that they're 70%, somehow they need to be in a nursing home somewhere. There are transitions of care. There are transitions of care. There are home units which are preferred. The preferred care is really in your home where that you're accustomed to and you have your relatives around you. But you need to have the support structures in place. You can't be at home relying on National Assistance Board or whatever time come around or however frequent the visits are, or you can't be reliant on a neighbor to drop you to your appointment. If the society had these systems in place, then things would be a lot easier. I was reminded this morning as well, and I see Senator Reid here, by an elderly relative, that the other thing that patients or elderly people are at risk for is this digital divide that is occurring. I also lived with a parent who might also struggle with remote controls from time to time. But certainly, this new world of technology, and including artificial intelligence, is quite intimidating. And when we go about our development as a country, and we adopt certain things like maybe cashier-less supermarkets, or reduction in bank tellers because it's more cost-effective for a bank, the impact that has on an elderly person is significant. Many times I've visited, well, I don't visit the bank many times, but the few times I've visited the bank, I have noticed that the only provision made most of the times for the elderly person in the line is the kind-heartedness of someone standing, say, okay, you go before me. Or maybe they're directed to a chair or something. There's no structure in place. When you go to a bank or a supermarket or anywhere to conduct business, and you can prove, I mean, some people may not need to give show an ID, but some proof that you're an elderly citizen, you should be able to be fast-tracked and receive service as a priority. These are basic customer service things that we should be considering. The care of the elderly cannot begin and end with government either, regardless of the government that's currently in office. The whole of society has to change, including non-governmental organizations and support that they must add in this space. I speak specifically to those in the health industry, but there are others. So for instance, the Heart and Stroke Foundation of Barbados, which is the only center in this country that does cardiac rehabilitation, the only center in this country where there's cardiac rehabilitation, and they've extended it to stroke. Who would get prioritized? We tend to prioritize those younger individuals who we say are at the peak of their productivity years. We want to get them back out to work. But what about the elderly patient who has to wait weeks for the next physiotherapy appointment, and therefore they're never going to make the maximum recovery because it is not possible in the public setting and they can't afford private care? I started off by saying that this bill was driven by a burning platform, the COVID-19 pandemic. And I also wonder whether the policy will speak to possibly future pandemics. Because as we age and the non-communicable disease burden increases, our entire society becomes more at risk in an approaching pandemic. And so things like pivoting to online shopping or shopping assistance. There are some supermarkets, I am told, I don't go to the supermarket that often either, but inside of supermarkets, there's some supermarkets where there's someone assisting some elderly persons to collect groceries and even assist them in checking out, those kind of things. But again, it's sporadic, it's not structured. Those kind of things need to be part of a system. I should be able to go on an app, Senator Reid, and say, listen, can I make an appointment to come to supermarket X on this day? Tell me what time so I can have a shopping assistant to help me to get my stuff sorted. And maybe some kind of public transportation besides a ZR to get to and from that place. These are practical solutions that we may think, because we are not elderly, are small yet, if we're fortunate. But the impact this has on the elderly, or the impact these have on elderly patients or people is significant, significant. I'm going to close by pointing the finger directly at some institutions who I think need to be more involved in the conversation, beginning, of course, with my own, the University of the West Indies. The aging metrics that are used to predict how social determinant systems or social support systems change will need to be revisited, will need to be modernized. We can't just be counting what percentage of people are over the age of 75 or how many people are in a clinic. Or we have to look at what are the needs of this aging population and use predictive analytics to suggest how are we going to change our society to accommodate them. The challenge is out there to the university, those of you listening, to construct and design appropriate studies that influence national development as it relates to age and the aging population. And of course, training. I developed a love for geriatric medicine when I was a medical student. And a previous member of the other place was a geriatrician. And I did not know that years later I would be practicing geriatric medicine by default because of an aging population. But there's no geriatrician currently in public service. How are we leading the charge of healthy aging if we don't have the number of experts there? So again, the challenge to the university, training in geriatric medicine and gerontology so that we can have a cadre of doctors, nurses, and other healthcare professionals who are trained to meet this need. And this doesn't have to be long specialty training, but even short courses could be done to sensitize staff at a basic level to interact, and then top-up courses as we continue in community services. The policy certainly describes a well-written, well-researched, and well-referenced roadmap of getting to where we want to get to in 2050, when many of us in here will be elderly and experiencing life in that part of our journey. My fear, however, is that we miss critical opportunities to identify what are the gaps that we need to get right. Who are the stakeholders we need at the table at this time to implement changes? And more importantly, how will we collect and use data intelligently to forecast changes down the road? And so, Mr. President, with those few words, I conclude my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Dr. Connell. Senator, the Honorable Christopher Maynard.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I, at this late stage in this session of Parliament, would like to congratulate the government, sir, on a program that it ran during the COVID-19 pandemic. And it was called, I think, Seek and Save. It was, I will not call it brilliant. I will not call it brilliant for one reason, which I will not say, but it was an excellent program. Sir, for the first time in my life, it was a time when Barbadians were confined to their houses. And it provided a perfect opportunity to gather data. Senator Reid will understand this very well. Hopefully, in my lifetime, there will never be another time we will be confined to our houses like that. But it was a program that involved a significant number of players numerically and groups, and the University of the West Indies participated. And young students, some medical students, participated in gathering the data. And I dare say some were suitably rewarded when the government gave national awards at the end of the pandemic. Sir, with your permission, I want to read one item, sir, in this resolution. And it says, whereas the government of Barbados recognizes that by 2050, 1 in every 5 persons will be over the age of 65. That, sir, is not a frightening statistic. It's a real one, sir. I have crossed that 65 bar, sir, and I suspect if you have not done so, you soon will. But, sir, it tells the country what we can expect in the future. And, sir, Senator Connell spoke of the involvement of the University of the West Indies in this rather long document that was well researched. And he's right. But it predicts, sir, some things for this country that if you look back at some of the events of this week already might frighten us. Sir, it speaks of the rising numbers in the older demographic in Barbados, 65 plus. But the age, sir, for me, is not the focus. It says that for Barbadians, there has been an increase of 2.3 years in life expectancy from age 60 between 1990 and 2017. That's excellent. However, the healthy life expectancy during the same period has only increased by 1.6 years. So people will live longer, but not healthier. That, sir, is a burden. That's a predictable burden. So while we can be happy that in the future we might live longer, we have to start thinking about how will we provide for this longer life in a less healthy state. And can a government do anything to reduce some of its long-term costs by putting some money up front? And I think, sir, that I some time ago spoke in this chamber, most likely during an appropriations bill, about the importance of purchasing and allowing medications that might reduce complications from a chronic, non-communicable disease that might cost more than the cheaper ones, but the long-term benefits will more than offset the costs in the future. And, sir, that clear statement, probably to my mind, backs up that statement, that if we can predict something is going to happen and we can possibly prevent it, or rather something unpleasant will happen and we can prevent it, then we probably should. But, sir, it also said that in 1990, 2000, and 2010, the population census reports for Barbados revealed a 17% increase in the size of the 65-plus segment of the population. Not the under 15s. We weren't having babies. We were just getting old. So when we came to this chamber, sir, relatively recently, and had an amendment to the National Insurance Act, and earlier on we spoke about my colleague, Senator Worrell, spoke about the wonderful possibility of retiring at age 60. I asked, how? How will we retire at age 60 What will we find in the ground in Barbados that will make this country very, 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 very wealthy? And we have a national fund that will give people large retirement pension plans and allow them to retire at 60. Sir, it's not going to happen. We have to be realistic and accept where we are and do the best that we can to keep people healthy. But sir, in that same statement, it said that the share of older people over 65 relative to the population has increased 11.9% to 13%. It means that the Barbados Drug Service, if our rate of chronic non-communicable diseases remains the same, the Barbados Drug Service can expect almost every year to spend more money on buying drugs and paying for drugs just to sustain people. Not to stop what is happening, just to sustain them, sir. So, I glimpsed at a newspaper, I think it was today, and I've seen this thing before, where someone proposed that we should increase the taxes on soft drinks. And having read this document before, I thought, well, I wonder, I didn't check to see the name of the person who wrote it, and I wondered, I said, well, maybe that person is thinking right. Because if we know what some of the things that might be causing harm, and we can reduce the consumption either by force or convincing people not to do it, then we should. Sir, one of my late colleagues, a gentleman called Dr. Tony Gale, I met him as a medical student, and I must admit, I apologize, that I thought that he was, I wouldn't say a nuisance, I thought he was difficult. Because he came to every conference and he fought about stopping people from smoking in public places. And if you wanted a bathroom break, sir, you would go out when he was going to speak. But I recently had to admit at a meeting that this gentleman, with that constant fight, got all the bans that we now have in place. Maybe somebody, maybe some younger person, not myself, I don't have enough time left for it now, needs to start that fight with the chronic non-communicable diseases in every forum that they can. Because this noise, this constant fight, seems to eventually get people to change. If we only produce policy documents and the public at large do not hear the details, do not understand what it really means, and it's not explained to them, we'll be in the same place 30 years on, having the same documents, sir. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator the Honorable Christopher Maynard. Senator Andrew Boyce.
Good evening, Mr. President. Thank you for recognizing me. I stand to support the resolution before the chamber, Mr. President, because I think that the policy attendant to the resolution is critically important at the time that we discuss it. So I would wish to begin by commending the crafters of this national policy on the elderly, because I think it is a comprehensive document that, if followed, and if every Barbadian takes heed of its contents, Mr. President, we would be in good standing. They are indeed contained in the resolution and in the policy some stark realities, and some of my colleagues have treated to them. The issues around population and the questions, the general question, Mr. President, about whether Barbados, with its limited resources, has the capacity to carry the extraordinary weight of an aging population and the multiple interventions that will be necessary, Mr. President. Sir, I encourage us, as stark as the reality is, and perhaps because it is stark, I encourage us to treat to the question with maturity and to treat to the question with sobriety, which we have done here today. Because contained in this document and bound up in the multiplicity of challenges that face Barbados in this regard are really quality of life questions, not only for those Barbadians who are aged, but for all of us. And as I was reading the document, Mr. President, I began to ponder on the question of what Barbados would and could be like, Mr. President, if indeed we heeded the calls, the multiple calls within the document. Let me say that even in the context of the stark realities around the aged and aging in Barbados, that this government is taking extraordinary steps to alleviate the worries and the concerns of that population and those who care for them, sir. And as I say in here all the time, I am both struck and impressed by the reality that we do not consider this in a vacuum. This policy, as you're well aware, exists alongside disability policy and the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Bill. It exists alongside broader interventions, Mr. President, in the social services sector aimed at bringing the services closer to the people and certainly increasing the efficiency of the traditional agencies through an amalgamation of those traditional agencies into a single amalgamated social empowerment agency, Mr. President, with satellite offices across the island. Just last week, we saw the opening of the first one at Six Roads, and there will be others opening in short order. And I say that to make the point, Mr. President, that that this government is serious about the interventions it makes in this space. It is serious about the interventions it makes in this space, sir, because the generation of Barbadians who are aged and aging, well, we're all aging, but aged and aging, have contributed immeasurably to this country. And we have the responsibility as younger Barbadians to care for them, and not only to care for them in the kind of paternalistic and traditional way that we often think of care, but also to create the enabling environment, Mr. President, for their continued flourishing and for their continued active participation in this society. Mr. President, it is why the government of Barbados is constructing or has created rather, the elder care program that some of my colleague senators have spoken to in this debate. A program that permits individuals to go into homes and to assist, particularly those individuals, sir, who do not have the benefits of persons living with them and actively caring for them and others. And this is an extraordinary help, Mr. President, particularly for those who are caregivers for persons who are older, because some of us exist in the sandwich generation. I think Senator Dr. Connell referred to it in his own remarks. That generation of Barbadians who are sandwiched between our grandparents and the children that would help to alleviate some of the challenges around population, Mr. President, and the extraordinary weight, I don't want to use the language of burden, but the extraordinary weight that creates for individuals. And it is those kinds of interventions that help to fortify the care economy and the scaffolding around care, Mr. President, so as to permit, or rather to dissuade individuals from neglect in the face of that extraordinary weight. In that same vein, Mr. President, the government's plans to construct a facility at Sterling for the care of, for daycare facilities. I don't always like to use that term, but daycare facilities for, respite facilities rather, for persons, for the elderly, Mr. President. Because again, the weight of having actively participating in your professional endeavors, but having the responsibility of caring for an elderly person, Mr. President, is extraordinary. And this government recognizes that. I think the facility at Sterling, which was announced in recent weeks, will be the first such facility since the Vauxhall Senior Citizens Village, Mr. President. And no doubt, given the stark realities contained in the policy, something that we absolutely need. And so I think that the government ought to be commended for that. And commended for their commitment broadly to building these kinds of facilities and initiatives so as to assist the younger generation with our care responsibilities. Sir, many of my colleagues, Mr. President, spoke tangentially to the issue of Alzheimer's and dementia. And I was pleased as I was reading the report, sir, to see a commitment by the government to ensure greater attention to the area of Alzheimer's and dementia, Mr. President. A recognition that the realities are stark and that for a long time, Mr. President, we have been very quiet as a country about this disease. we've been quiet, Mr. President, to the point where sometimes it feels as if we just accept it as a part of aging. We just accept that our grandparents and those older than us will come to forget. But I think, Mr. President, that we need greater awareness around the disability, around the condition. And in saying that, I do recognize the extraordinary contribution of the Alzheimer's Association to Barbadians' understanding of the condition. But I certainly do look forward to more and better investments in public understanding around the disease. By that same token, Mr. President, I think that the time is now that we develop a national plan around Alzheimer's and dementia with specific focus on increasing the capacity. Senator Dr. Connell referred to gerontologists earlier, to neurologists, certainly neurologists and other professionals who can aid in the care of persons suffering with or living with dementia and Alzheimer's would be an important investment, certainly as we animate this national policy. And I talk about this, Mr. President, from some personal experience. I've spoken in here before about the extent to which I'm a grandmother's boy, and we recently, just a couple months ago, buried her, and it was Alzheimer's and dementia was a disease she lived with in the latter stages of her life. And so I happen to know well, Mr. President, the realities of caring for someone with the disease. And I think as a region, but certainly as a country, we need to invest in both the public understanding of the disease, but also in the kind of scientific investment and care for the disease, because it does not appear, I'm not a scientist, Mr. President, but I think the data indicates that it does not appear that it is going anywhere. And so I think we have to match our investments, things like the National Development Scholarship, things like other investments across the health sector in not only care for Alzheimer's and dementia patients, but an understanding of the disease, Mr. President. Because the prevalence, it certainly appears to be reaching an extraordinary amount, and we need to do something about it in a concentrated and implementable way. Mr. President, I wanted to address this notion of the digital divide, and because we appreciate the extent to which the e-commerce activity, the digital environment, is a place that is ubiquitous at this stage. It is everywhere, and persons who are older must indeed participate in it. I spoke earlier about the wonderful interconnectedness of national policy in the social services space, and as we were developing the national policy on disability and the law, we spent considerable time ensuring that there were protections embedded in that legislation and in that policy to ensure that digital services were accessible to persons with disabilities, making the country really and the private sector commit to that accessibility. And it is important, as is evidenced by this national policy, that those accommodations are present for persons with disabilities and present for persons who are older, and that we invest in them as well. So that things like the digital accessibility tools and rules that ensure that a person can navigate their e-banking with ease, or that government services are accessible to persons with disability. I keep saying disabilities, I presume naturally, because there's sometimes a nexus between the two things. But are accessible to the elderly, because sometimes one of the ways in which persons can keep their minds active and continue to contribute to society and is through the carrying out of their ordinary business. And we have to commit, Mr. President, to making these tools available so that government services, certainly our commercial banks, and certainly in the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, we're having a conversation with our commercial banks around this, so that the tools that we come up with in this area and the guidance that we provide will no doubt contribute to the accessibility, continued accessibility for persons who are older. Mr. President, I do not intend to be long, and so I will end by, as I began, by commending the government of Barbados, by commending, permit me, Mr. President, to say the name MP Cynthia Ford, by commending Professor Dwayne Devonish for their contributions to that which is before the chamber today. I hope, Mr. President, that Barbadians will take the opportunity to read it, to imbibe it, Mr. President, and to live it, and to animate it in their interactions with older Barbadians, Mr. President, because their quality of life improves our quality of life. Mr. President, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Senator Andrely Borst. Senator John King. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, thank you very much. I want to express appreciation to all of the honorable members who have spoken and who have contributed in no small measure to the policy in the first instance and the debate here today. Senator Worrell, in his contribution, made a number of strong points, and certainly I think all of us identify with the idea of a grandmother, a great-grandmother, or elders in our communities, but more importantly, keeping our elders in our homes. Dr. Connell and Dr. Maynard, Mr. Maynard, spoke with not a small amount of medical expertise, and we appreciate their inputs, and the same for Senator Andrely Borst, who just spoke. Mr. President, this has been a full day, and with these few words at this point, I beg to move that this resolution do not pass.
The question is that this resolution do not pass. Those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This resolution is now passed.
I know. Mr. President, I thought you were gonna.
Yes, please. Mr. President, we refer to announcements by Your Honor the President. Yeah.
By way of announcements, I'm to inform you of a message which I need to send to the Honorable House of Assembly in relation to our small adjustment to the Tourism Amendment Bill. And it reads as follows. Message from the Honorable the Senate to the Honorable the House of Assembly. The Honorable the Senate has the honor to inform the Honorable the House of Assembly that at its sitting on Wednesday, the 14th of January, 2026, the Tourism Levy Amendment Bill 2025 was amended in the following terms. In Clause 1, the word 2025 was deleted and the word 2026 was substituted therefore. And the Honorable the Senate transmits the amended bill to the Honorable House of Assembly, inviting concurrence in the amendment to the bill, dated 14th of January, 2026, and signed by me. And that's, of course, a timing difference between the House dealing with it in a few weeks ago, 2025, and now 2026, so we have to make that small technical adjustment for purposes of regularity. So please be aware that this will go off in our name to the Honorable House of Assembly.
Presentation of papers recommitted.
Senator comments.
Mr. President, there are a few documents that I must lay today. First, the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Plan, BERT 2026, the Civil Aviation Unmanned Aircraft Systems Regulations 2025, the annual reports and audited financial statements of the Barbados Tourism Marketing, Inc. for the years ended March 31st, 2021 and March 31st, 2022.
We revert to public business.
Senator comments.
Mr. President, that brings us to the end of government's business for today, and I beg to move that this sitting of the Senate be adjourned. Sine die.
The question is that the Honorable the Senate do not adjourn sine die. The Honorable Senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it. The sitting therefore stands adjourned sine die.